2 minutes. Georgia, and faster. Like this.
Would you like to introduce me or introduce?
No, please introduce yourself. We're lazy here.
Okay.
The Acopian Center for the Environment.
All right. I can go.
Yes,
So
please.
people are listening. Okay. Welcome everybody to this seminar on energy market issues for the 21st century, organized in the framework of the STREACS project, which is led by the Acopian Center here at the American University of Armenia, and which has leading a consortium of 7 partners from Armenia, Ireland, and Italy. All right. I want to thank STREACS for inviting me here. And basically, this is the third seminar I'm giving, and this is to cover an area that is in the scope of the activity of STREACS, right, which is about strengthening energy transition research in Armenia. So this final, so we covered several aspects. We looked at CBA of energy policies. We looked at the energy security issues, right, in the region. And now we are looking more broadly at the energy market issues for the 21st century. My name is Norberto Pignatti. I am Associate Professor of Policy at the International School of Economics in Tbilisi, where I've been working also in the policy branch as head of the Center for Research on Environment and Natural Resources Management, working on energy issues and so on for several years. Okay, so let's start. Okay, I will stand so you will see me better. It was working.
Sometimes it needs.
See, I told you, right? It works and then it.
Fantastic. Yeah. Okay. Good. So now, of course, one can speak for hours about this topic. So I tried to structure this as a basically walk through the main challenges why energy transition is now at the core of basically of the policy challenges faced by all countries around the world. And I will start by introducing very briefly of course, the crucial role of energy for development purposes and how our modern economies now are, and now we have entered what is defined by economic historians that work on energy issues as a high energy civilization. Okay, and then we'll move basically to discuss the challenges that are faced by modern economies when they want to secure energy security, pursue development, but also environmental sustainability. And then basically how we will zoom into the energy transition and why in this context energy transition does offer opportunities and what are the challenges, okay, to reach these opportunities and to make them realized. And I will conclude basically after discussing the opportunities, but mostly the challenges, what broadly could be the opportunities, right, and what could be the role of energy policy to facilitate the pursuit of energy transition. So let's start with the premise, energy demand. So demand is considered, it's always defined as a derived demand because we do not demand energy per se. We demand it because we want to benefit from the goods and services that we get from the energy use. Okay, so that's of course trivial, but let's start from this. And because the idea is energy allows us to get goods and services, and these goods and services increase our well-being. This has been true since the beginning of mankind. And it is true even for, I mean, in nature itself, right? Even if an animal doesn't have an understanding of energy and its role, it needs energy to function. Any living being does. So, and over the history of mankind, the access to energy, the quantity of energy that was available, and the type of energy that was available has determined the level of development that could be achieved. All right? So, of course, this is a key point. Now, the earlier energy systems, which are classified in the history of energy economics as these energy systems that arrived until the 19th century, so when basically there was a beginning of the Industrial Revolution, were called organic energy, so the economies were called organic energy economies. And organic energy because the energy that was achieved was coming in renewable forms, typically biomass, food that was powering muscles, and to a limited extent, water and wind. So all the renewable sources. And the limits to growth of these systems was the rate of reproduction of the organic energy, right, of these renewables. There was also an issue of density of generation, power density of generation, and versus the power density of demand. So basically, given the calorific power, for example, of crops or of wood, you need a certain area, right? So you have a certain amount of calories produced per hectare, for example. You have a city, depending how dense the city is and the type of economic activities you want to have in that city, the density of demand for power might be bigger than what, for example, in an hectare of city, the demand might be higher than the production of energy in an hectare of land. And actually, that was one of the things that led to the transition to fossil fuels. Because at some point, especially, and we see it first in UK, where the first industrial revolution started, we have that the demand of energy grew so much that it has been estimated that to fuel the industrial revolution in UK, they would have needed an area of land that would be 10 times larger than the surface of the UK, right? So of course it would not have been possible just using the organic economy. And that's why we have the shift to, we reach the limit of organic energy economy and we move to fossil fuels. Why? They have a higher density of power. You can dig them, you can transport them at the longer distances because, again, the cost per unit of caloric unit that you are moving is lower, right? And of course, you can use it also in different ways. And we moved gradually at the beginning and then faster through introducing all the fossil fuels into our economies until we got to where we are in this high energy civilization. And very briefly, you can see the scale of the change. Here, it doesn't start from 1800. It starts from 1900. So it's already after 100 years, right? So, of course, the scale was even smaller. But even just in the last 120 years, you see, we went to a world primary energy consumption of 22 exajoules to the current 619. So there was an increase of almost 30 times, right, in the amount of raw energy that is consumed. Now, this is linked to two major trends. One is the population trend. The population grew about 5 times, but also, and that is the other key trend, the consumption of energy per capita increased 6 times. So we have a 5-time increase of the population, 6-time increase of consumption of energy per capita for a total increase of 30 times almost of total energy demand. Fueled mostly by fossil fuels, because even now we have 81.5% in 2023. These are the latest data I could find that are covered by fossil fuels. Okay. Now we got to high energy civilization. Now this has come with challenges again. So we are all aware of the idea of the issue of climate change and of the observation that indeed, since not by chance, since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, we have had a steady increase in the percentage of CO2 in the atmosphere and the quantity of CO2 in the atmosphere and other greenhouse gases, which has started to lead to a rising in temperatures. And this phenomenon has become so strong and easy to identify, right, at some point, that there have been international actions to try and limit the projected growth in temperature to this 1.5 degrees compared to pre-industrial levels. Why this is relevant, of course, is because there are very high costs associated with that reaching and even more passing this limit. And here very quickly, let me just show just a snapshot, a vision here. This, the red, well, in this part, there is not an assessment about the impact direction of climate change. Here, the red indicates adverse impacts, okay? And basically, you can see that at the global level, or even just we look at the global level, there have been negative impacts already estimated on water availability, food production, health and well-being, the life in cities, settlements and other type, and the damages to infrastructure. And there have been pervasive changes in ecosystems. So this is the impact of the emission of greenhouse gases already is visible and quite large. And we are not yet at the 1.5 line, or better, actually, 2024 has been the first year in which we have been touching the 1.5 degrees increase. But this is 1 year. So of course, the idea is that systematically we should be there around 2030. The point is that are the policies that we have in place and that have been put in place sufficient to ensure that we will not pass by too much the 1.5 limit of warming? Not at all. So these are projections taken from the latest report from the IPCC, which is basically showing how if we continue with the policies that are implemented at the moment and put in place at the moment, we would actually be in somewhere between 2.2 and 3.5 degrees increase. Okay, so this is the environmental aspect. Now we are looking at the future. We have seen, again, projection of increasing emissions. Why? Because we do want to keep, and the idea is that there will be an increase in world GDP driven by an increase in energy consumption. Interestingly enough, the increase in energy consumption is not expected to be proportional. So there are expected gains in terms of efficiency, in terms of our ability to use better the energy sources that we have. There is also, if you look, the impact on emission is expected to be even lower because we are supposed to be expected to become better at having carbon-free energy, right? But this is all about transition. So these are the main issues, broadly speaking. The energy markets and the energy system will have to help to steer in a direction that allow development, growth, but minimizing the negative impacts, right, on the world, on the environment, and therefore also on human society. Now, the path we have to pursue is narrow, because again, we want to ensure that there can be development. We want to make sure that there is energy security, and we will give a very brief and very simple definition of energy security. But at the same time, we want to ensure that we have environmental sustainability, right? And so indeed, this is encapsulated in this summary of the challenge. Every government around the world, to a degree or the other, states that it wants as a priority to obtain a system, an energy system that is reliable, that grants continuous access to an increasing flow of affordable and clean energy. We want energy. We expect the need of energy to keep growing. We want, as much as possible, this energy to be clean. And we want the flow of energy to be continuous, so not to have interruption. The system must be reliable, and it must be affordable. The cost of energy is a key factor in all economies, and also for the well-being of individuals, especially the most vulnerable groups in the population. Now, given this general set of priorities, to be fair, not all the countries give the same weight to everything, right? For example, not surprisingly, typically developing countries tend to care in the short term more about affordability, reliability, and access. And the clean component is there because, of course, they are aware of the costs, but it's not always at the top of the priorities. I mean, if you look at the largest country in terms of emission, which is currently China, when you look at their energy security program, they acknowledge the importance and they invest hugely on transition, on green transition, but they are still the largest emitters because they fuel with carbon more than 50% they cover of their energy needs. India, which is growing, it's going to have, again, more energy consumption than the EU, not too far into the future, also has like 50% of its energy produced with carbon, coal. So why? Clearly because they have a priority on development and on making sure that their population receives the energy they need at an affordable price. And so we will get to this later. This has consequences also in terms of potential policy that could be used and so on. Now, given that these are the goals, right? Energy security, access to energy, reliable energy, affordable energy, but clean energy. Energy security, what is in this context threatened by a few aspects. For example, the high concentration of fossil fuels. And we will discuss this, especially given that they still have a very large share in the energy mix worldwide. There are unstable geopolitical environment and volatile energy markets, and there is an increase in demand. All of this together make it more challenging for each country to ensure energy security, which again, prices, availability, access, and cleanness. Let's start with the concentration of fossil fuels. So the fossil fuels are physically concentrated and they still cover more than 80% of the world primary energy consumption. If you look at this, both oil, gas, and coal are very concentrated. The top 10 countries that produce or that, if you look at reserves that have proved reserves, have more than 80% of these reserves, in some cases 90%, and always more than 70% of production. So concentrated in a few countries. It doesn't help. So this, of course, again.
Sorry, can you say that again? What is the concentration?
The concentration of reserves, for example, if you take the top 10 countries,
The reserves.
In
that
terms
they
of
have.
reserves, they have 96 or 86% of the
Okay.
global reserves
So the reserves are concentrated in a few countries.
in a few countries.
Yes.
Which means that most of the countries around the world do have a very small fraction of the reserves. And the same is true for production. Also, production is very concentrated. This means that in order to secure energy to your country, most countries that have to use still fossil fuels have to rely on trade. And they have to establish trade relationship and make sure that these fossil fuels are transported. In fact, the transportation of fossil fuels is a huge business. At any point in time, there is, I think, about 1/3 of the oil that is being traded is constantly on the move in the oceans in order to be able to move to when there is a change in prices in one market or the other market, right? But this happens, the fact that these countries, that the resources are concentrated in few countries, does partially give them some market power, which can help extracting a bit more rent. But on top of that, makes the system vulnerable. If something happens in those countries, which are few, then there can be a disruption in the supply of energy. And that has a dramatic effect, a cascade effect all over the world, because again, these countries are few. And it doesn't help that with the increase in geopolitical tensions and military conflicts around the world, among the most unstable areas are the ones where you have a concentration of fossil fuels. Take Middle East and Russia are among the largest areas that collect and that have these proven reserves, right?
Venezuela, South America.
Yeah, there is Venezuela in South America, which again is pretty unstable as well. But at this moment, more the geopolitical conflicts I was thinking of were more the other two. But it is true that Venezuela is another key. The US are another one. But the US are so far relatively insulated from conflicts, right? That's why they have increased substantially the production. So they are actually now supplying a lot of energy, although the prices are a bit higher. So high concentration, increase in geopolitical instability has led to a lot of volatility. And this is, so the first aspect that we were speaking, this interruption of supply is a problem to energy security from the point of view even of getting the energy, right? Having access to the energy. Now, the instability adds another dimension. Not only there are situations in which might be hard to satisfy or difficult to satisfy your energy needs, it might also be very costly. And that is the affordability dimension of the energy security. As we see again, here there is a graph produced by the energy agency of the US that is analyzing the world market of oil. And you can see how over the decades, the oil price has been fluctuating substantially. But the fluctuation takes place also in the very short term, and it can be very dramatic. This is what happened to the EU, especially, but actually, if you can see, the markets are all very much integrated now. So when there was a shock in 2022, which actually started before the conflict between Russia and Ukraine, it was due to actually a combination of stocks not being refilled as fast as possible, as expected, because of weather patterns in another part of the world, which requested a lot of gas in a moment in which usually Europe would have refilled its own stocks. So bottom line, in 2022, the cost of gas jumped up substantially. So in this graph, you can see, again, going from around 4 to almost 40, right? A 10-time increase in the price of gas per million BTU. So these big fluctuations create huge disruptions. And in fact, in the EU, many companies closed or they had serious problems in terms of survival. So this is the other phase of energy security. So again, that's why we see the concentration of energy, of fossil fuels, the relevance, the geopolitical instability, all of this contribute to instability in the economy level in all the world, basically. Now, the scenarios for the future tell us, again, we will have an increase in demand. We have different ways of satisfying it. These are projections from the International Energy Agency, the World Economic Outlook of 2024, and it's basically showing alternative scenario. So this one, STEPS scenario, is the stated policy scenario. It's based on the policies that have been already announced in an attempt to, again, decarbonize the economy, make a green transition, move towards lower emissions. We see how still there is an expectation for a large increase in energy demand. Now we are about, as we said, 619 exajoule, and if things continue as they're going, we would increase further. And we see that it is expected a large increase in renewables, but in the STEPS scenario, again, it will be providing more energy than any individual fossil fuel, right, by 2050. Still, they will cover only about 40% of the total energy need of the world. In order to get to net zero emissions, which ideally would be the goal in order to try to limit to the maximum the increase in temperature. And we would have to do much more. The total demand should be contained, and the investments to increase the role of renewables should be faster than currently planned. So, and this takes us, so let's get back to the main issue that we're trying to solve. We want to secure energy security, right? And we wanted to make it in the most sustainable way possible. And that is when the opportunities of energy transition come. It seems to be basically the stones to kill two birds, because energy, if you move forward toward the energy transition, you are going to give much more weight to renewable energy sources, which are much more evenly distributed across the globe, right? The sun is shining to different degrees in all over the world, like wind is blowing. And again, the geothermal energy might be available, and so on and so forth. Biomass, you name it. So all the renewables compared to fossil fuels give a great advantage that they are much more evenly spread. So definitely one would reduce dependency and increase energy security. Now, then we have now an advantage. It's progressive. It's a good news. So good news are that the cost of energy coming from renewables is declining over time, which will make it increasingly affordable to rely more on them to satisfy the energy needs. And on the climate side, of course, we know that renewable energy sources, although they don't have a zero impact on the environment, have much lower footprint compared to fossil fuels. So these are the positives, these are the opportunities. There are still challenges to achieve that. And there are several. The first one, not the main one, the first one is that the magnitude of the change that is going to take place if we want to get to the scenarios that we have seen, especially the most environmentally friendly scenarios. We are speaking about energy transition, and you will hear sometimes discussion of experts saying, well, we had energy transition in the past, this is just another one. It is not. And I will show you in one picture why. So it is unlike anything we have done so far. Okay, mankind never had such an attempt of doing such a transition. Second, we now are struggling to supply, to have enough growth in the supply of minerals, of critical minerals. So demand to achieve the goals that we have will grow faster than the projected growth in the production of the materials needed. So that is a big constraint that has to be addressed. Second, we want to have more energy security and less dependence from others, but it turns out that there is an extremely high concentration of manufacturing capacity in critical mineral mining and processing. We are speaking of 80–90% concentration, like in the fossil fuel. So that is also a challenge to energy security. There are substantial costs and time required to build new energy infrastructure. So and this is related, of course, to the scarcity of minerals and so on, but even again to the magnitude of the change, right? That we require mobilizing a lot of factors of production, and that it will have increasing costs. The faster you want to do it, the more costly it will be. And another final challenge that I list here, there are also others, but I try to highlight the main ones, is ensure the reliability, the accessibility, and affordability of the system itself, especially for the most vulnerable groups in society. And minimize the social cost, which is again related. Now, this is why I'm saying this is a transition different from all the other ones we have seen. So here it shows exactly the beginning, right? What we said, 19th century. And if you notice this, you will see that the largest source of energy at that time was biomass, basically, right? It was wood, crops, and so on. Now, if you notice, then normally say, well, we transited somehow to coal, then to oil, then to gas. But in reality, was this a transition in the sense we are facing now? No. Why? If you look at the level of consumption of biomass today, it is higher than the total amount of biomass we were consuming in 1800. And this is the same. Coal is higher than it was at the beginning. Oil, gas, all of this. We never got rid of the previous energy source. We built on top of it. What we are saying now is that we should basically go down from an 80% of energy need covered by fossil fuels to maybe 20%, maybe less, in 30 years from now, 25 years from now. And this place should be taken by the renewables. And that's why, again, that is why this is a challenge, because again, one thing is to build on top of what you have, to continue and add sources. One thing is to eliminate a substantial part of your energy supply and replace it. This is a great challenge. So, and now let's get to the specific challenge. So the growth of the supply of critical minerals, as I said, is at the moment insufficient to match the expected growth in demand, which means that prices will be going up for all these critical minerals, unless we find a way to put in place new production, or we find alternative. We have technological developments that allow us to use better what we have, substitute it with something else for which we have more availability, right? And definitely we will be needing to scale up our activities in all of these areas and diversify more than we are diversifying now and make all the system more resilient. The hope is that with increasing market prices, due to the fact that, again, demand increases faster than supply, there will be the emergence of new projects, right? New projects will be planned, they will become assessed as valuable, as profitable, and then they will start. One of the main problems being that, however, these projects have very long lead times. It means it takes several years to develop a new field for these critical minerals. And at the moment, the acceleration in the implementation of this project is not fast enough. Despite the projections in the needs, some in the industry say that, okay, the projection in the needs are nice, but there is some risk aversion on the side of those who have to develop these new projects. And so, because they want to make sure that demand is going to be there to justify the investment cost. And even the moment the investment starts, again, it takes several years. The other side, on demand, there is the hope that changing the technological progress will allow substituting, replacing some of the rare minerals, and provide cheaper ways to use more abundant and easily to collect and process materials. So this is the hope. So this is one key aspect, increasing the productive capacity. The other aspect, from the point of view of security still, is the increase the diversification in the market, enlarge the production, not only physically in terms of amount of material extracted, but also diversifying where they're taking from. And there are initiatives around the world, of course, but at the moment the concentration is very high. As here I put some numbers, some statistics to make the point. China, for example, has between 85 and 95% of manufacturing capacity for components of batteries, more than 85% capacity in world capacity in photovoltaic manufacturing, and 75 to 90% of the processing capacity for cobalt, graphite, and rare earth elements. So in case of further geopolitical instability, I mean, China is at the center of everything, right? So this energy transition relies very much on that. So, and as a consequence, energy security is not guaranteed, right? Exactly like in the issue on the area of fossil fuels. So this is a critical factor. There are attempts to diversify supply chains. The EU and the US have tried to move, especially in some areas like battery cell manufacturing, but they're way far from ensuring the capacity in all areas is sufficient to satisfy even their own needs, not forget giving it to others. Okay. Actually, a large portion of the planned new project is also being developed in the same countries where the capacity is already located. So actually, most of the new projects that should increase capacity are still located there. And again, here, another example that I make, between 50 and 95% of the supply growth that is projected between 2023 and 2035 for refined copper, lithium, nickel, and so on, is projected to take place in China or Indonesia, let's say. So again, concentrated, but there is no clear sign that this concentration is diminishing, right? So again, this is one aspect. Now, the other aspect, access, this was more access. Then here is about the reliability of the systems. To do, I mean, all those materials are used to upgrade, to build the new infrastructure, to upgrade the existing infrastructure. We will need to invest also heavily in that, right? One of the constraints, for example, to electrification of the societies around the world is the fact that to substitute the fossil fuels, the amount of electricity that should be used is such that the current infrastructure is totally inadequate to allow for the transportation of that electricity. So again, that's why we will have high demand for copper and for all these materials, right? So, and we need to become much better at developing storage capacity, because most renewable energy sources, which have a lot of advantages, have a key weakness, which is intermittency. And we need, as we said, a continuous flow of energy. So to ensure the correct functioning of the grid and in general of the economy, we need to increase the reliability of the system. For this, we need to become much better at storing energy, in particular electricity. So this is a key bottleneck, right? Here, the challenge is to have like in the case of extraction, also enough investments in research to improve our technology, but also simply to develop and build this infrastructure with the technology that is available to us. And this is a key point, because we're speaking of huge resources to be mobilized. Right? The third dimension of energy security is the accessibility and affordability for the population. And we start from a situation in which, at the world level, this is a macro view. At the world level, there are millions of people who still are lacking access to electricity, and more than 2 billion individuals that are lacking access to clean cooking methods, for example, which is indicating that, well, not only we have to convert our system, even the system we have now is insufficient to provide energy services that the world population needs. And the world population is expected to increase further to about 10 billion before starting to peak. Mm-hmm. So if you remember the trends we saw that led to the big increase in energy demand, there was the increase in per capita consumption and the increase in population. We are not stopping in either of them. And now what is happening is that, again, I go back, developing countries are still in the most challenging situation because they are the ones that have more issues providing access to modern energy sources to their population. But at the same time, and they have this facing the trade-off between investing more and spending more of their limited resources on push for the green transition, which in the long run might pay off, but in the short term, right, slow down potentially if the for sure reduce the amount of resources that are available to expand the coverage. And doing the two things together is not straightforward. Okay, one could say we could try to do both transition and expand the coverage. It's very ambitious and it's costly anyway. So there is a potential trade-off here. And some countries in their macro decisions are showing that, because they're showing to stick to fossil fuels despite investing a lot on the development of green energy part of the economy. So, and this is why a comment that if we fail to address at the world level properly the challenge of the developing countries, then achieving the world level goals that we're trying to achieve to fight climate change will be impossible. It's not possible to achieve the world goals to limit the impact of climate change if the issues of developing countries are not addressed. Because that's actually the area, the part of the world in which the benefits for the energy transition would be the highest, but where the capitals are insufficient. And so increasing further the level of efficiency and the greenness of the economy in developed country has much higher costs per amount, for example, of emissions that we reduce compared to doing the same initiatives, helping developing countries. So, but this is unfortunately, we are not in a world in which we have a one world government, but every country has its own challenges. And of course, there are many obstacles to this, to an approach that tries to optimize the situation at the world level, right? Each country is more trying to, of course, to optimize the situation from its own point of view. So when we look, this is the last category of challenges associated with transition, is that there are going to be costs. Not only the cost of investments and the problems, logistical problems, but there are social costs. Why? Because if you want to have an energy transition, you will have to change the structure of the economy and the way it works. You have to restructure the economy to match the new reality. And restructuring has always been costly. some sectors are going to lose and shrink. And
Can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah.
How's it going to be? Who's going to lose? Who's going to?
for example, well, there is a whole chain, supply chain or value chain that is functioning based on fossil fuels. So in each country, there are people that are working to, I don't know, refine, deliver fossil fuels and extract them if you have availability and so on. Many of the countries that are producing especially will have to cut those jobs.
So the
So
fossil fuel industry,
the fossil
value
fuel
chain
industry
will have to.
will have to change.
Yeah.
But that is not the only thing, right? We are seeing this in the transportation sector. Now, the EU I think is a great example of this, the automotive sector. To achieve the goal of increasing, of moving away from fossil fuels, it's necessary to abandon the combustion engine. And that's where the automotive sector has been profiting and growing over the decades, right? That's where the knowledge, the know-how, the expertise is. And now what is happening is the automotive sector in Europe is in crisis because there are very stringent prescription and the goal to get rid of combustion engine by 2035. And this level of skills and knowledge in the electric vehicle production instead is still lagging behind compared, for example, to China, who has been pushing on that direction earlier and more intensively. So all these people that operate in this sector, in the best case scenario, will have to be retrained. In the best case scenario, will have to be retrained. The skill will have to be rebuilt. All the manufacturing plant, everything will have to be dismantled and reconfigured. So the costs are incredibly high. In the meantime, there is no guarantee that, again, it will be easy to convert workers that work in a fossil fuel economy into workers that have to work in a totally different environment, which is more relying on electricity, right? So all of these are big challenges. But even if we are going to be successful, the costs will be high. And there will be transition periods in which people will lose their jobs, they will be retrained, requalified, and they will enter again the system. The social safety nets will have to take care of that. Otherwise, there will be very big social issues, right? Problems. And the suffering might have. And in fact, there are backlashes already now. There is a part of the political spectrum in the EU that is fighting back because it sees the costs getting near and the benefits farther away. And politically, this is also costly. And that's a risk for attempts to slow down the process.
We're talking about Poland. We're talking about.
But even Italy, or even Germany itself. I mean, the automotive system, sector will take a lot of time. And
so the idea of just transition is not enough.
It is the idea of just transition has to be then transformed in real policies, and this policy will be very costly because there will be losers, many losers, and in different sectors again. And this will lead very likely in the short period to an increase in energy costs. And that, because energy is in the production of all goods and services, prices will go up. So there will be costs, and the most vulnerable group of the society will have to be supported. And again, this is something that is it's not been fully planned, right? There is not a clear plan on how to do it. And as the cost will be more visible, then the urgency of these policies will increase. So this is a major type of challenge. Now, how could energy policies try to help mitigate all of these potential challenges that we have seen, right? Well, I divided them in three big groups. One is decarbonization actions, but in reality, which is about a better use of energy, right? Higher efficiency, reducing carbon emissions. So it goes on to the two sides mostly. One is the demand side, try to contain demand somehow. It could be to increase in efficiency. It could be in some cases but this is then becomes trickier from the social point of view, pricing correctly the cost of fuels, of different type of fuels, which, for example, carbon pricing, right? And more extensive use of carbon prices. Whenever there are subsidies, maybe to make the cost of energy lower, to help vulnerable groups in society, or to help the competitiveness of companies, this should be removed. But this can have negative effect on competitiveness of firms. It increase the costs for the most vulnerable group in society. It leads to more efficiency. It helps on this side. It can help moving away from fossil fuels, but it causes pain, and that is one of them. Another way, apart from removing price distortion, is to support investments in the renewables part, right? To develop again those clean energy supply chains, but also to increase the competitiveness of renewables, the introduction of green fuels, and increase energy efficiency. One key aspect in decarbonization, and that again can help achieving the goals at the world level, but also at the national level, in terms of carbon emissions, could be the development of better technology for carbon capture and storage, which would mean in the short term we can still use a bit more fossil fuels, maybe, as long as we can extract carbon. This is problematic though, because so far we have not been very good at it. Yes.
I'm sorry, do you mean public or private investments in renewables?
I haven't said it, but you need both.
Yeah, because Spain and Poland
You need
actually
both.
they tried to do that, and concerning private investments in renewables, and it didn't work.
Yeah, so there is a problem there. That is why these things cannot be achieved without the public policy, which needs to tap into all possible sources of capital. Of course, if you can mobilize the private sector, that will make things faster and easier. But for that, there is still a gap between the financial analysis and the economic analysis, right? When you take into account all the costs and benefits, it makes a lot of sense to move to renewables. But for the private investor, well, you have still facing financial constraints. And that's when, again, public policies can help.
And feed-in tariffs are
This could be going here.
support investment.
Yes, because if you increase the remuneration of the renewables, then of course you ensure that they can sell and everything.
That's how Armenia built its hydropower capacity, small hydropower plants,
Yeah.
through feed-in tariffs, and now with the solar.
One thing that is also important is to see that, again, everything must be done, and that is what makes it hard, having a vision, right? And having an understanding on how all the pieces of the puzzle work together. For example, I think of how Italy at the beginning was lagging behind in terms of solar photovoltaic capacity. Then they put in place very strong incentives, including feed-in tariffs, including even encouraging private installation and remuneration of private citizens even, right? And the fact that they were selling. But then they at some point, they didn't predict correctly the response, which actually was higher than expected. And that put instability in the electricity market. And they found that they had overcapacity in several areas. And then they had to struggle or rebalance, and they changed again the structure of incentives at least 2-3 times. And when you have this volatility, then it confuses the market. The investment becomes more problematic, and so now the situation is more stable. But again, it's very important to have a vision, understand what the possible constraints are, which is not easy because they keep changing, right? At the beginning, it was hard already integrating 20% of renewables. Now we can integrate 40% and more, and hopefully we will get to. So as technology develops and our understanding develops, as our capacity to respond to imbalances improves thanks to IT developments, for example, AI might help a lot in the management of these systems. It is a moving, right? horizon. So of course there will be some changes. This is kind of physiological. And another key aspect at the world level is support from developing countries, for what I said before. Because here in developing part of the world, where the demand is expected to increase faster, actually, there is not a projection for large increases in demand in the developed world. Most of the growth in energy demand will come from developing countries. And that's where the scope and the return on investment will be higher. So that's basically for the decarbonization. Then there will be policies to increase energy security that can be put in place to help increase the diversification of energy supply portfolio, both in terms of manufacturing capacity and in extraction and processing of minerals. Okay, and this is taking place to some extent. It's just, as we said, policies should probably be put in place. Oops, what is happening?
Sent you a signal.
That's it.
Yeah. So, and well, investments in research and development, and then supporting disadvantaged communities to improve. This is financial support to help them improve their condition by saving energy, by getting more access to renewables, and they will need to be helped because, again, the upfront costs are usually a big burden. And then the last slide is about the supporting social policies, which are related to the costs for those who are negatively affected by the transition, which I already spoke a lot about, and so I will stop. I was a bit long, but it's a very big topic.
Yes, very good. Thank you very much. So questions?
People, could you announce for people who are online if there is any question?
Are there any questions?
From people online or people offline? Vartan, you have a question?
Yeah.
Vartan?
Yes, I think.
So I was wondering, so you showed us this new zero emission target by 2050,
Net
right?
zero emission, yeah.
Yeah, and I guess the target was fixed some time ago. It's not a new target.
No.
And
yeah.
we should have some dynamic path to reach the target. And I
Yeah.
was wondering whether we are on the path or we are off the path.
Oh, can I restart a moment? No. Well, the book answer, but I will have a graphical one. We are very off, very much off that
An
path,
associated question that I have is that
which is here. Now, we have to get here. Our predicted, the path on which we are is this one. To achieve net zero emission, we should get here.
usually when your plans are not working, you revise your plan, right? And then you kind of take the reality and then think what can be done. But it seems to me that at least in this area, what I see is that we always stick with this unrealistic target and just get becoming wider and wider. Do we have any global vision of how we should change our view of this, or we're sticking to?
The short answer is, I don't think there is a global vision, or better, there is a global vision from the point of view of the goal. The scientists have a global vision. They say, we have to get here. This is the policy. Now, as I said, the costs of transition get higher and higher the faster you want to do it. I have no doubt we will get to the net zero emissions. I'm very skeptical we will get a net zero emission actually we should be here at 2050. Right?
So the idea is that, we want to rush it because we don't know what will happen if we get to these there may be much bigger costs that.
Yes.
So that is kind of the argument. So
Yes.
why not suffer for 50 years and then get to a decent system after 150 year transition? So why sudden transition? Why is that argument?
The sudden transition is required because what the scientists are telling us is that this 1.5 degrees which they set as a goal, right? Which then it was adopted at the world level by policymakers and so on, is the point until which the negative effects, the costs, will be still growing gradually. And say the moment, so the losses that you experience, the negative effect, the change in weather patterns, and all the costs that this imply, from going from +1 to 1.5, which is 0.5, are much smaller than from 1.5 to 2, and much smaller than from 2 to 2.5. So the point is, and the tricky thing is, if we don't achieve zero emissions by 2050, we will definitely overshoot. And bringing back the temperatures to the level that are in which we experience less suffering and less costs will take much longer. So we are much faster getting there than coming back, because then there, according to the models that they have developed, there are feedback effects that actually reinforce that process. So the point is, the costs are going to go up, and the damages are going to increase much more than proportionally as we get away from 1.5. So the science suggests this, but the costs are, as we said, high, and the constraints are big, and you don't have a unified world decision-making body. Again, if you look at efficiency, the optimal control theory of emissions, for example, says you should start by reducing emissions where it costs less, right? That's not what we are doing. The highest control is done where the costs are the highest, inside the developed countries, which have already been declining and increasing efficiency over time. The least costly way to achieve these goals would be to invest massively in India, that is developing, for example, maybe China, to help them abate even faster and get rid of coal as fast as we can. But politically, that would mean...
Political economy cost of that is prohibitively high. It's not
Yeah.
going to happen.
No, and that's why the countries, and also so, and basically all of this is saying every country is thinking to its own costs and benefits in reality, which means that, and this is what we are getting to, right? Because basically there are external positive effects that you don't incorporate as a country. And there are big costs in changing the way you operate. Like the EU inside is facing a lot of discontent from regular people, because the cost of living is, and the quality of living in the short term is threatened. People are afraid to lose jobs. They are unhappy of having to pay more for cars and transportation services and so on. And they see, okay, the increasing cost I'm going to have, they don't perceive as acutely as the cost that they are having now, right? So, and this is inside the countries, and if each country works independently, there will be an undersupply. I mean, we know it's when you have a public good that it is going to be undersupplied, because the benefits that you get from somebody else's action are valuable, but you are not going to condition your choices based on that. So we should find a binding sort of mechanism in which I do this if you do that, and everybody is operating. But the world doesn't work like that at this stage, especially with high geopolitical tensions. If suggest transferring money from Europe or the US to China, nobody is going to do that, or to India even, right? So this is the challenge that the world is facing. But, yeah.
Thank you. Parish has a question. No? You have a question? Our ESS students don't have questions? Yeah, please.
Just your opinion. I mean, this is for me a coordination problem, like public goods problem, externality problem. Every problem that we know is here. But we see high rate of concentration in every aspect. And I guess with the emissions, we would see similar concentration, maybe not as high as with the resource concentration. Wouldn't it be beneficial to transfer this dialogue, this discussion from a global problem to a few players' problem, when at least game theoretically we understand that we can analyze these situations better and understand what is happening, rather than to keep it globally, knowing that we will not be able to solve a global coordination problem?
It would be, I agree, it would be easier. So if you have less players, and they're the main ones, because if you took the top 10 emitters, right, and you put them, they are probably going to emit indeed 90% of the emissions of the world. So it's going to be, and it's easier to work with 10 rather than with under 90 nations, right? So 95, don't remember the exact number. There are still a lot of constraints from the point of view of internal politics and geopolitical.
So the top 10 are China, US, EU,
Still EU,
probably EU,
there will be India for
Russia,
sure, Russia,
India.
These are already 5, and then again,
And then Iran and some of the oil producing. So you're going to get a mix of very tense countries.
and
So this
basically,
globalization actually is creating a much more complex.
Yeah, but for me, that would add in perspective of reality, when then you would see the problem, like, because now you're blurring the problem. You're saying there is a global problem, but there is not a global problem. There is a specific problem with China, India, US, for example, right? And then when there is a specific problem, you can focus at it better and maybe realize that it's not solvable. And then maybe we should think about what to do with the consequences, because obviously it seems we're failing to solve the preventive action.
we are let me be a bit.
Yeah, I'm exaggerating
Positive.
for the fact. Yeah,
I also stress the constraints. I have to say that since the nationally determined contribution were introduced, there has been a faster progress than there was before. Well, before there was this more rigid approach. We have to achieve this and this, do this level of investment and this level of abatement of emissions and so on. And it was going even worse than now. Then what happened is this new mechanism got introduced in which every country says, I can do this. And the other say, okay, then I can do this. And in a way that helped a bit. I mean, it improved a bit because now the countries commit to something that they feel they can do it to the limit of pain, right? But seeing that everybody else is also trying to do it has helped a bit, right? It's a bit of improving the coordination. It's not sufficient. It's way far. And I agree with the fact that a lot of thought should be given to how to mitigate, because we know that we are not going to stay with below the 1.5. Again, 2025, we already had it. Of course, it's only 1 year. But the forecast were we would achieve 1.5 degrees above the per-industrialization level by 2050 at some point, then by 2035. Now it's moving to 2029 because we are not managing to keep.
A lot of frustration I hear from climate people is that so much attention is paid to mitigation, reducing carbon emissions, and very little resources are devoted to adapting to changes. Which a country like Armenia, no matter what we do, we're going to have to adapt to changes. Our emissions have nothing to do with this global. I mean, we're just not even a rounding error. I mean, we're just a minute contributor, but we will have to adapt. And so a lot of developing countries have to adapt to this situation, and much less attention is being paid to adaptation.
Yeah, that's exactly what I mean. I mean, we should be out of the discussion of what they do, but we should be thinking only about adapting. And then there are some countries which can still think how to prevent it.
No, yeah, when you look at the emissions, again, I think China is around 1/3 of global emissions, right? EU is 10%. So, and the cost of reducing further the 10%, for example, even for the EU, are extremely high. And even if we were to halve the emission, which would destroy the economy and cause incredible pain, revolutions, everything, because halving the emissions, I mean, we would reduce by 5%. It is less than the contribution, the increase in China emission or the one that will be India emission in 1 year. So you really would need to work to adapt in most countries, in all countries should work to adapt. And then you should focus the mitigation efforts where it's more economically meaningful. But as I said, theoretically, the solution is clear. Implementing it, especially in this very tense world, is complex. And imagine now there is also the tariff war, right, on top of the tension that there were before. So it is complex, yeah. So we should prepare and try to minimize the negative impacts. Okay.
I see no question from the Zoom.
I'm very shocked.
But a lot of positive comments. So thanking for the presentation, thanking for the insightful presentation, a lot of that, but no question.
Well, I asked all the questions.
You have the monopoly.
That's what I
Concentration of
Thank you for the
questions.
questions.
Great work done. Thank you very much.
This was arranged beforehand. You
No, no,
Yeah, it's a fascinating topic and a key one, but yeah, that deserves.
I mean, that question of you get US and Canada working on sulfur emissions or nitrogen dioxide emissions, they figure out a solution. You get all these global, players working together, it's nearly impossible, and yet we have the ambition of.
Oh, and even now, again, going to the most recent news, for example, the rearming of Europe, right? It's also going to delay. I mean, it's all going to be based on combustion engines, for example. And you don't want to weaken, you do not want to weaken your economy. So while there is geopolitical confrontation. So they're already thinking to pull back on some of this very strict commitment that they gave internally to themselves, because if you weaken and shrink the economy while the others keep producing and using fossil fuels, you get disadvantage.
It's tragedy of the commons at the
Yes.
global level, and
Yeah.
that's going to.
And we are seeing it unfolding in real time. So